So, hello everybody, welcome. Thank you very much for giving us a bit of your time today. This session is called Read and Publish, Showcasing the Librarian Experience. My name is John Edwards. I'm the Open Research Sales Manager for Cambridge University Press. And I am very, very pleased to be joined by two of our partners from Montana State University, Hannah and Rochelle. Guys, do you want to introduce yourselves briefly before we get going?
Sure. I'm Hannah McKelvey. I am the Electronic Resources and Discovery Services Librarian at Montana State University Library in Bozeman. I work very closely with Rochelle in her role as Collection Development Librarian, but my main duties are to manage our electronic resources and review contracts and licenses for those. And then I also oversee our discovery layer, which is Primo by Ex Libris.
I'm Rochelle McLean, Collection Development Librarian at MSU in Bozeman. And among other duties, my main duty obviously is managing our collections budget, which is the largest budget in the library. I work with Hannah to ensure that things get paid for and turned on. And then we also make the bulk of acquisitions decisions here in the department that we work in.
Great. So I think what we'd like to do with the time we've got today is spend as much as we can in kind of conversation between the three of us around the decision that Montana State made earlier this year to enter into a read and publish agreement with CUP. I think there's lots of stuff to dig into around that decision, and I think it'll be really interesting to share the perspective of Hannah and Rochelle around that point. So to frame some of the discussion, I'm just going to run through some very brief slides, which really are designed to kind of frame the discussion. So I think to start off, what is a read and publish agreement? That's what we're here to talk about today, but I think it is a good idea just to briefly outline what that actually means. So we're all aware of transformative journals agreements. I think every publisher is offering them in some shape or form, but they do come in different varieties. And at CUP, we are operating a read and publish model. And for us, that is the combined provision of two services under a single agreement. So very simply, it's reading access to our subscription journals, and it's also open access publishing across our hybrid and gold journals. And what Read and Publish is designed to do really is to enable institutions to provide cost-effective ways for their faculty to publish their research open. It's also designed to help us as a publisher transition our journals list to open. That's one of the key targets that we've got as a university press, to transition to being a majority open journals publisher. And Read and Publish is the mechanism which we have decided allows us to do that in a sustainable way, and also a cost-effective measure for institutions to take benefit in that change too. Because we are a university press, we're part of the University of Cambridge, and I think that's very important to say, because it certainly informs our position around transitioning to open. And I think because of the type of organisation we are, we're doing this from the perspective of the benefit for researchers, the benefit of the academy at large. And I think we've got really firm goals and firm commitments about increasing equity and inclusion, as well as a commitment to quality across the entire research ecosystem. So what actually goes into a read and publish agreement? How do we come up with them? Well, I think very briefly, we can go through two kind of core ingredients, and they are the spend that an institution would have with Cambridge on our journals at this time, and also the value of the publishing output that the institution would have across our journals. And the combination of those two costs combines to yield a result which is either an uncapped or a capped read and publish agreement. So there will always be some kind of provision for repurposing subscription spend to open access publishing. That's guaranteed in some shape or form. Exactly what the scope of that is determined by the spend you have with us right now, and also the output that you have across our journals list. But it is really important to say that whatever those two numbers look like, some kind of provision will be possible. And I think we're really keen to work with institutions right across the kind of spectrum, really. So those institutions that are very, very heavy research producers, we really want to offer them a cost-effective means of transitioning, but also at the same time, we completely believe that institutions who don't necessarily produce that much research still have a huge amount to gain from moving into a different type of journals agreement with us. So in 2021, we have made Read and Publish the very center of our renewals offering. And I think there are a few reasons we've done that. In some ways, it's business as usual. We've been committed to open research for many, many years. Certainly everything that's happening in Europe around Plan S has accelerated that, but we have always been really looking to transition our list in this way. I think you can't ignore the global backdrop that we're looking at right now as well. And I think the pandemic has absolutely underscored the necessity for research to be available as soon as possible and as widely as possible. In many cases, that is literally been a life and death matter. And I think for us as a publisher, we now feel like we have the requisite knowledge and the requisite experience from running lots of Read and Publish agreements so far to bring this offering to the market in a much wider way. And I think we're really in a great place to help institutions make the best of the opportunities that are available by repurposing some spend from subscriptions and on to open publishing. But most of all, we really want to change a perception, which I think is out there, which is that a transformative journals agreement is too expensive. There are lots of reasons why institutions can enter Read and Publish agreements with us. And the same should be true, I think, for lots of publishers. And I think we are working really hard to change that perception and make libraries realize that something is within reach and can be within reach for indeed 2021, should you be ready to make that move. I just want to flash this up as well, because it's a snapshot for all of the agreements that we've got so far across the globe. We've got around 600 individual institutions that are signed up to Read and Publish with us. There's a large number of national level agreements in Europe, but we are beginning to really build up our Read and Publish footprint in the US, especially. And of course, we've got our agreement with the California Digital Library, which we're very proud of and has been in effect for over sort of a year, 2 years now. And we've also got a number of individual institutional agreements with the Los Alamos National Laboratory down in New Mexico. We've got another one with Iowa State University. And of course, we've got one with Montana State University. So I think it's great to have Montana State with us. And I think it would be, it's of great value for the library community to hear some insight into why you chose to move into a Read and Publish agreement. What's that experience been like? And are there any sort of pieces of advice necessarily that you might want to share with other librarians who are considering this move? And I think it's important to stress that this isn't necessarily a conversation about moving into a Read and Publish agreement with CUP. I think that's our starting point, but I don't think we necessarily want to anchor it in that way. I think we want to consider the whole sort of spectrum, and that libraries might be considering moving into these types of agreements with lots of different publishers. I think we want to broaden the discussion really, if we can. So with that in mind, shall we move into the discussion part of the session, guys? Are you ready to kick that off?
I think so.
Good. So maybe to give a bit of sort of context for us, I've given a bit of context for the kind of CUP side of things. Do you want to kind of set the scene for us in terms of Montana State, and in particular, the kind of library setup that you guys have there.
Mm-hmm. Sure, I can go ahead and start off with that one. So Montana State University, MSU Library, I'd say we look quite a bit different, than the other institutions that CUP has these agreements in place with. We're quite a bit smaller. We are an R1 research institution. As of 2019, we had an FTE of around 12,846. We are our state's land grant university. I would describe our library as medium-sized academic. We're really not that big at all. And we do have a statewide consortium called TRAILS, which stands for Treasure State Academic Information and Library Services, kind of a mouthful. And that consists of about 24 other libraries across the state. It's made up of MSU and our other flagship school in the state, which is the University of Montana. And there are also some tribal colleges and some community colleges, which are quite small. And then recently our state library joined. So unless you have anything else to add to that, Rochelle, I think that's kind of a quick overview of what we look like.
Yeah, great. And in terms of the library team that you're a part of, who have you got working alongside you, and who might there be that is involved in the read and publish side of things in this agreement specifically? Are there any other colleagues that you've got as part of the team?
There are. Hannah and I work very closely with our scholarly communications librarian, and we also work with the Trails manager, Pamela. So the four of us, actually starting about a year ago after the last Charleston conference, have been doing lots and lots of talking about read and publish and what that might mean for us here at MSU.
And for anyone who's not necessarily familiar with that role of a scholarly communications librarian, what would you be able to kind of just talk around that role a little bit and explain exactly what they spend their time doing?
So Layla, I don't know everything that she does, but she actually started an author fund here at MSU prior to the Cambridge one, where we do fund some APCs out of the collections budget. Unfortunately, not a lot, but we are able to do some. She also created ScholarWorks, which is the depository for materials coming out of MSU. She's a part of our executive team at the library, which is the higher department heads who make the decisions for the library. Hannah, do you have anything?
Yeah, I would add to that. Layla does a lot. She offers a lot of consultations around publishing across campus. There are lots of questions about, is this a predatory journal or not? And different types of publishing, I mean, there's green open access and whatnot, and we get a lot of questions about that. So she handles all of that. And then she's also, I'd say, our in-house expert on like copyright and can we upload items in our library, or sorry, our learning management system. So she's a big player in all of that, and kind of our expert on like publishing, open access, copyright, to sum it up.
Yeah, it's really helpful to have somebody who's kind of an expert on those things, because they're, I think I'm sure just like me, similar to me, you guys have had to kind of brush up on the intricacies of like intellectual property law, which I didn't really know anything about until, open access really came sort of front and center. So yeah, it's great to have someone there who's kind of an expert on all of that for sure. So talking about kind of where you started maybe as an institution, but maybe also just as a kind of library team in terms of thinking about open access and how you might provide for that kind of requirement really that faculty might have. Where did it all begin? Did it begin with that author fund you mentioned, or was there another starting point?
Yeah, I guess the open access journey for MSU, I'll give you the background that I know. So Layla actually started as our scholarly communications librarian in 2014, I believe, early 2014. And one of the first initiatives that she did besides start ScholarWorks, which is our IR, was she worked with Faculty Senate to get them to adopt an open access statement. and just in support of open access. And that was adopted in January 2015. And since then, I think our campus is really supportive of open access. They're aware of it. People publish in that realm. And then, as Rochelle noted, I think it was starting in 2016. Rochelle, does that sound right?
Yes.
We started. We have a dedicated $50,000 from our collections budget for the last 4 years to help our MSU authors publish open, so they can put in a request to have their APC costs covered for a certain journal. And that's really popular. It usually burns up in like the first couple of months. And so I think it kind of started there. I don't really know the history of it prior to Layla's position. And then as far as Rochelle and I think we're aware of it, but the read and publish agreements, I think, are kind of helping us sort of step into that realm and work closely with Layla and learn more about how our campus understands and sees open access.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think there's two sides to kind of making this transition, really. And I think one of them, and you've set it out really nicely there, one of them is getting that institutional support and building that if it doesn't already exist, and then seeing how the library can kind of contribute to that support or facilitate it in some way, really. So I think it's, I mean, that's fantastic that that Layla's been so kind of active in really raising the awareness and kind of starting that transition. Yeah, that's fantastic. And so, I mean, it sounds safe to say that open access is a priority for Montana State University. There are some kind of formal, maybe institutional level goals or interest around it. Are there any kind of formal goals around open access or anything like that?
I am not aware of any. Hannah and I talked about this. We aren't aware of any. We had hoped to, we're actually supposed to present at our faculty senate meeting last week to bring news of our Cambridge University Press agreement to them. And unfortunately, we weren't able to. So we'd hoped to bring back to this discussion some feedback from that, but we couldn't. So that'll have to wait a couple weeks if anyone is interested in learning about how that went.
Sure.
But there's definitely a sense just from our own library administration that OA is important, and it's being talked about across campus. And I think just, all the events of 2020 have even brought that even more to light.
Right, definitely, yeah. And I should say actually that I should have said at the beginning, if there are questions, please do pop them in the chat on the Pathable page, and we do have time set aside to get to them at the end. So please do stick them in there. So thinking about your kind of decision to actually enter into this agreement with CUP, I think we first discussed things in kind of April this year, and the agreement itself started in June. So we spent a bit of time kind of working on it and talking about it with each other. I think it would be great to sort of hear, after we had made the initial proposal to Montana State, what happened next from your perspective? What could you give us an insight into the kind of discussions that you had about whether to make that move or not?
Sure. So Hannah and I actually started looking at our renewal in December. We came back from Charleston. We decided to form a task force here in the library that's made up of Hannah, myself, I already told you, Pamela and Layla. And so we really started having discussions about read and publish in general, starting in December, January. And then the renewal for Cambridge was coming up. I was in talks with our representative at that time. And so the idea, the two just started coming together, whether this could work. And then COVID hit, obviously. How we managed to still talk about that during COVID, I don't know, but we did. And so we were looking even more closely at, what we wanted to provide for our users. And in the beginning, we were looking at usage and maybe thinking, maybe this is a good package that we won't renew. because of, the budget situation was getting a little hairy. So we had to keep that in mind. But then we're also balancing, like, our users need things and we need things to be made available, especially now. And so I think when you guys, introduced this idea to us, it was very intriguing and it really just seemed to be good timing.
And I'm interested to know, and I'm sure everyone's interested to know, how did you assess the offer that we made? Because I think Read and Publish is an interesting library product, if you like, if that's the right term to use. And you might not assess it in quite the same way that you might assess, say, an ebooks bundle or something else, like, how did you actually sort of interrogate the offer that we'd made, if you're willing to share anything on that front?
I think having Layla in the conversations was very important. She has a really good knowledge of publishing, a lot of experience in that. So having her feedback was critical. And probably with regular journal package renewals, we're not going to bring Layla into that conversation. She's not in our department. So it would really fall on Hannah and I, and probably feedback from other librarians. We don't have a liaison program, so we can't really rely on that either. So you're right, there's a big difference there. Also having Pamela, who's part of, the consortium, and, talking about ways that we can bring our other academic libraries into the mix was important. Even though there isn't a lot of publishing that goes on with those smaller schools, the access piece is important. And maybe by introducing something like this to smaller schools, they'll start publishing. We don't know. So that was really key. And then along the way, we had many, many discussions. We also invited our library dean to be a part of the discussions, and that was great too. He's very, very supportive of what we were doing, but also didn't, even though he had opinions, obviously, he really tried not to influence us either way. He really left it up to the four of us to make the decision and put a lot of trust in us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would add to what Rochelle said, in addition to pulling in Layla, who's very familiar with publishing, initially, Rochelle and I, we approached the assessment just looking at like cost per use and our counter usage, on that standard usage. And, our cost per use was not great. It was a lot higher than some of our other publishers. And that's kind of what set it off, I think. And then with COVID, there was a lot of uncertainty about like, is our budget going to be cut? Our Cambridge package it's not, I'd say it's like I'm trying to think of the right word to put it in terms of how much it costs. It's around, I want to say like $64,000, and we have a $5.7 million collections budget. So it's pretty small, but still, that was a lot of money that we thought we could maybe shift towards something else. So we really did think about cutting that, and then that's when we kind of started having those conversations as a Read and Publish to up the publishing, and then also kind of lower that cost per use and see if we can get any traction on it. So there was all sorts of evaluations going on about that. And then in the meantime, this was our first one, and our licensing task force had just started, so we were pretty new. We were also kind of, at the same time as we were negotiating, we were sort of developing like an evaluation rubric with some guiding points that we want to look at going forward. So we learned a lot about assessment from this. So it was interesting and a really good learning experience.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I mean, do you think that entering into this type of agreement helped you hold on to some of your budgets? Do you think that this in a way has helped you say, actually we're getting more from our serials budget than we did before, because under the context of Read and Publish, it's both of those reading and publishing elements. So do you think that's, I don't know, that just struck me as a possibility that maybe that might cause the institution to look at the budget in a slightly different way, maybe? Do you think that could be true?
I would agree with that. Yeah, I feel like we're helping. At the beginning of the agreement, it was a limited number of authors, but it was exciting to be able to help those people. And the feedback we've gotten from them has been positive and sort of this reaction of like, oh, I didn't know you had that, as though we'd had it all along and it wasn't new. So I do feel good about how our money is being spent.
Yeah. That's great. And I mean, it sounds like it was very broadly positive in terms of the reception of the idea of moving into this agreement. But did you have any resistance toward kind of making this move and making this shift? I'm really interested in that.
I don't know if resistance is the right word. I will say, like, throughout the discussions amongst the 4, sometimes 5 of us, at a point throughout the discussions, I think each one of us had some skepticism, depending on the conversation that we had that day. I think that we do have influence over each other. And so there were times that I came out of a meeting going, this probably isn't going to be for us. And I think each one of us had that experience. As far as any sort of resistance after we announced it, definitely not. But I would attribute that more to, I don't know that a lot of people, at least within the library, I won't speak for beyond the library, know what a transformational agreement is. They just aren't reading about them as much as we are. We're deep into it. And so we know how confusing it can be and how different they can be. And so I think people just didn't know when we've announced it to the library anyway, they just don't know what questions to ask because they don't really know what it is. But no, like I said, most of the feedback has been like, oh, I didn't know you had that. Great. This is great.
So jumping onto that, because I think that you've raised a really kind of important element of these types of agreements, Rochelle. I think there is an education piece for I think both the libraries and the publishers to play in terms of making sure that people understand exactly what these agreements are and the kind of opportunities that they make available. So how have you tackled that challenge, or how will you tackle that challenge in terms of making sure that people know what this is and they know how to make the best use of it?
Let's see, Hannah, do you want to talk about the news piece?
Sure. Yeah, so I guess as we, just to backtrack just a tiny bit, as we started this conversation with Cambridge, a couple of the things we did was we brought it up. We have faculty, we have about 16 faculty members here, I think. So we have monthly faculty meetings. We brought it to that group to kind of put it on their radar and talk about it. We've announced it at all staff meetings to talk about it and kind of tell people what it is and sort of help with that education of transformative agreements and how licensing of these resources is sort of shifting and changing. And then, so we've done a little bit of that. And then moving forward to when we actually sign the agreement, Rochelle and I were really excited about this. And we wanted to put out a piece in our MSU news. And they're sort of picky about what they publish there. And so we wrote this great piece. We worked with our dean and we sent it off, and they came back a couple days later and they're like, this sounds like it's just really like internal library news. It's not worth sharing beyond the library. They seemed like it was just relevant to the library. And Rochelle and I were a little bit like, what? And so that was sort of eye-opening in helping us understand like how to advocate and explain the importance of this. So we wrote back to the editor and just explained, some key points like how it benefits all of MSU. It's really great for other libraries to know that, a library of our size is doing this. And after that, things sort of changed and they did end up publishing it. But that was sort of our first reaction that, it didn't translate beyond the library. It didn't really make sense. And so after that, I think I guess it was to be expected. I feel like that happens a lot with library things. So we did that. And then as Rochelle noted, we were trying to get on the Faculty Senate agenda last week, but somehow there was a miscommunication and we were left off. And so we will be going to Faculty Senate 2 weeks from now to talk about this. And so we're sort of excited that that'll be our first time getting this up in front of faculty and sort of hearing their feedback. And so I think we're excited, but a little bit nervous, to hear about how they feel about this. And then, we've also just been, we've been bringing it up recently, and I think maybe it'll be a question, the terms of the agreement changed. So we brought it up to our staff last week to kind of put it up in front of them again and say, hey, we have this, don't forget. And so we're really just trying to, be able to talk about it whenever we can and whenever it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think that's, for us, that's from the publisher side, we see that raising awareness of the agreement is the best way to ensure that it's successful. And by success, I mean that people are publishing open access under it or as part of it. And I think that's often the hardest part to get going initially, but actually there's a sort of momentum that you can build up, and it's just a case of keeping talking about it in exactly the way that you're describing there. And I think eventually it sort of sticks, and that's the place we want to get to. But I think it's inevitable that you need to go through this period because it is new in exactly the same way it's new for librarians and publishers. It's also new for kind of publishing faculty. Yeah. So I guess, yeah, because thinking around the kind of process of actually launching it, and thinking about all of those kind of communication points, and once the agreement is actually live, I think, did you have any reactions to it, kind of outside of any of the announcements you made? Did anybody reach out to you and say this is great or this is terrible, or did you have any sense of any reaction from the campus?
We did not. We launched it. Hannah and I created a website from our library site that details the agreement. One nice thing is we had the author fund, and so working with Layla, we decided that authors who wanted to publish in Cambridge using this through this agreement, we also asked them to fill out that author fund form so that we could track everything together. And so I do think that having that author fund already in place may have helped a little bit with momentum, like you said, yeah. Because we got 4 requests pretty quickly after we launched it. I remember that first email, getting it saying someone's requested funding. It was very exciting and we were not expecting it that quick, right? You just don't know. You know that publishing's been happening, but you're just not sure, like, is anyone going to know? Is anyone going to come? But they did pretty quickly. And so I think we did get those 4 right off the bat. Now we've had a little bit of silence, but I'm not worried about that.
Yeah, I think sorry, Hannah, I think it looked like you were about to say something.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, yeah, I think it's been really encouraging from our side, because to have that publishing coming through so quickly after an agreement launching is fantastic news. And I think that is credit to the work that you guys have done in terms of broadcasting the agreement and making sure the information is out there. I'm absolutely certain that the author fund kind of process has probably helped that a lot, as you say. I think that's been a really useful tool, but I think it's really encouraging that it's going so well so quickly. Yeah. And I mean, talking about the sort of day-to-day of the agreement, it's obviously it's always live in the sort of background, but how often, because it's been live for, I suppose, about 4 months or so, and what would you say if somebody asked you, how much extra work is this? Like, what sort of burden does it place on your time?
I wouldn't say there's been extra work. I think the work is just different. I think we're looking at our journal packages, all of our agreements and our renewals more closely, and it's kind of exciting. It's something new. So we have a lot of enthusiasm for doing this work. I don't find any extra work. I think everything has been very seamless. If anything, it has given us the opportunity to work more closely with Layla, like I said, and really know what's happening and what the landscape is like on the OA front. Mm.
Yeah, and I guess I would add to what Rochelle said, it's not a whole lot of work. Once we got the agreement in place, Cambridge held a training for us to show us how to use rights link, which is the process that the authors submit their manuscript to, and it's accepted. And then if there's a request, it all comes through that system, and we just simply approve it. And I guess I don't think we really mentioned the details of the agreement. So initially, and I think this is one of the questions that came through the chat, is how many articles do our authors publish with Cambridge? Cambridge gave us that data, and it wasn't a whole lot. It was about, I think, an average of like 8 articles per year. And so initially, when we had this agreement, it was there was an article limit each year because it's a 3-year agreement. So for 2020, we had a cap of 7 articles, and then we negotiated an extra article each year. So next year we were going to allow for 8 articles, and then the following year we were going to allow for 9 articles. So there weren't a whole lot of articles. You know, I mean, that's not a ton of articles to approve. And then Cambridge allowed us to customize the web page that they maintain to sort of explain our process. And as Rochelle noted, we were asking authors, you know, once their manuscript was submitted, to also just, you know, quickly submit the author fund, and we have that linked from Cambridge. And then Layla would say, I got this, to Rochelle and I, and then we'd go into the rights link system and approve it. And so it was, I don't know, 5 minutes of work per article. But recently, Cambridge made our agreement uncapped. So we don't know, which means our authors can publish however many articles they want, of course, and there's a safety net clause, of course, in that. But we're excited about that. We don't know if we'll see a whole lot more requests come in. We don't know if that will like make more work for us, or if we'll still see the same amount of articles being published. Let me tell you from our data, we saw that we had for 2020 so far to date, I think there have been 10 articles published, and 6 of those happened before we had the agreement in place. So I don't know. I think it's just one of those things to wait and see how the agreement grows and how our users interact with it in terms of what kind of maintenance, if our maintenance will stay as it is, or if it'll become really a lot. I don't know.
Yeah. And do you think, I'm interested to hear your thoughts around this. Do you think it's important for the library to be involved in these types of agreements? Do you think that's important? Or do you think, yeah, to play devil's advocate, you know, do you feel like it's actually none of the library's responsibility? You know, how do you feel about that?
I mean, I think so long as the library is responsible for negotiating the agreements, and we're subscribing to materials, and we're working so closely with publishers and vendors, I think it makes sense. At least here at MSU, we have some very knowledgeable librarians, pretty smart. We know what's happening out there. So I'd like for us to continue to be a part of it.
Do you think that it's possible that these types of agreements could change the way, or change the role that the library has within the institution? Because to me, it feels like moving into this type of agreement gives the library a kind of an opportunity to maybe redefine the way it's seen within the organization and within the institution. And it's an opportunity to become a sort of kind of formalize what was already happening already in terms of being a sort of central hub of knowledge, and kind of sort of broadcasting the different opportunities that faculty might have as a result of these agreements that you're signing. So I'm interested to know if you feel that might happen. It's early days, obviously, but that could sort of shift the internal dynamics maybe of how the library is seen at Montana State as well.
Yeah, I would say yes, I agree with that. I don't know how it might change that. I know that, you know, our dean is, he sits on a lot of campus committees, as I'm sure lots of library deans do. We have, I can't remember, it's an acronym. Do you remember what it's called, Rochelle? The Office of Research and Engagement, I think. We have a new VP for that's been here about 1.5 years. And as far as I know, he's also pretty savvy with some of these agreements. He's asked our dean about, you know, the Elsevier CDL agreement, and, you know, have you heard what's going on with this? Or he'll forward us emails when it was kind of happening. And so there's some awareness of these types of things going on. And so I think it's a good chance for us to sort of say, hey, we're working on this, here's what we have, and show that we're being as fiscally responsible as we can with our budget. We've had a stagnant budget for like the last 5 years, I think, Rochelle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't actually get a cut this year, knock on wood. So we were really excited about that. And so I don't know. I think yes, it will be a shift in the way that the university understands the library and sort of how we're spending that money. And I think there's a good opportunity for us to go out and talk to campus, like how we're going to Senate and sort of explaining, like, do you know that the library buys these things, that you have access through the library, and sort of put the library on our, our users' radar, and help them understand a little bit more about what we do. So yeah, I think it will eventually change the perspective a little bit.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
Can I just add one? Sorry.
Of course.
Sort of just a high five to Hannah, like working with someone and other people in our library here, across the way there, who are just really open to trying new things. I think that's something I've loved about working with Hannah, is that she and I can go to each other and say, we should just try this subscription or other things and just see how it goes, right? Like, we might fail. Maybe we'll end up not doing any publishing in this. I doubt it, but I love that enthusiasm that she has and that I have for doing, trying new things. And again, we've been lucky to have a very supportive library administration. I think one thing we've seen with libraries over the ages is we change. We used to be a place where we ordered books and they stayed in the library forever. And now, we do more maybe access versus holding onto things. And so I think we are seeing, changes just in how libraries are. But we have this backbone of providing information, however that looks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a really great point, Rochelle, in terms of the willingness to try something new. And I think that I would echo that sort of thanks and sort of, kudos there, because I think we have felt that as a publisher, and these types of agreements really work best when there is a willingness to try something new. It is new and there is a degree of risk associated with it, but we try to, I think by the way we structure our agreements, we try to minimize that risk as much as possible in terms of the actual extra investment that's required. It's pretty much a sort of business as usual subscription in terms of the money that you're spending. But in terms of all the other things that go alongside it, a willingness to kind of dive into that and grapple with some of the challenges that come with it is really great to have that kind of positive attitude. And I think that's true for all of the agreements that we've got as well. Now, I'm thinking about all of the different institutions, and there's definitely a kind of unifying thread between everybody, that everybody has been really keen and active to try and kind of dive into this and embrace it as a new thing, which is fantastic. So thank you for having such a sort of positive attitude towards everything. It's great, yeah. And I'm really interested, and I think we'll kind of move on to questions shortly, but what does success look like for you guys in terms of this agreement? I think that would be really interesting to have some insight to, because I think you mentioned earlier there's maybe a sort of rough plan of kind of how you might assess it, but what are the kind of key markers of success that you're going to be looking at?
Mm-hmm. I guess I'd say from like the data side of things, of course, I think we'll continue looking at, the read side and seeing if our cost per use for reading is going down, especially because we're talking more about Cambridge and promoting our whole journal package. So I think we'll still look at that. In terms of the publishing side, I think we're only 4 months in. And so it's a 3-year agreement. And so I think we're still learning about that. We were really excited because, as I mentioned, for 2020, we had an article limit of 7, and we already had used up 4 of those. So we were like, yeah, it's working. People are finding it. And so we were really excited about that. But then the switch to the uncapped model, I honestly don't know. I think as we go along and we kind of look at it, every few months or from year to year, and then, at the end of the 3-year, I think we'll have a better answer. And I think we're also really curious about what the people side will be, right? The reaction, like, are our users finding it? Are they giving us feedback? You know, is it a positive experience? I think all of that will sort of be roped in. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, Rochelle.
I would agree with all of that and say, you know, I think also we can look at, you know, this success from the fact that we did this, that we went through the process and we worked with a publisher and learned so much. I've always, I'm pretty new in my position. I've been collection development librarian. This is my third academic year in this position. And so I work very closely with vendors and publishers, and I have always just thought of my relationships with them as coworkers. And so working alongside them to get things up and running and to bring materials to our users is exciting. And so the fact that we got to do this with Cambridge, and it was pretty much a positive experience throughout and pretty seamless, sort of, you know, has been exciting. And so I would call that successful.
Yeah, I think, kind of thinking aloud, I guess we've got, because in terms of measuring the success, you've got the historic publishing averages that we shared with you during the discussions. So you would have that as a sort of basis really for what your output was like in our journals. So I guess you could base your assessments on how the rate of publishing or the rate of open access publishing measured against that kind of historic average. And I think that's how we look at it internally as well. And we roughly aim and it differs between sort of which year of the agreement you're in, because I think there's an expectation that as these agreements go forward, the kind of effectiveness of authors converting their article to open or publishing their article open first time round becomes more efficient. So it becomes more successful. That rate of conversion is higher. But I think what we look at is between sort of 65 and 70% of your historic publishing average to be published OA in year one of an agreement. So that's kind of what we use as kind of an internal marker as well, just to kind of give everybody a bit of insight into that. And that goes up slightly through each year of the agreement. And we've seen that that's roughly been true because some of the agreements we've got in Europe are in some cases sort of 3-4 years old. And we are seeing that kind of trajectory across those agreements, which is fantastic. And that's where we want all of the agreements to be. So before we move on to the Q&A, I just want to ask Hannah and Rochelle, are there any other kind of perspectives that you'd like to share, or anything that we haven't covered that you feel could be of interest to anybody out there?
Mm-hmm. I mean,
yeah, I don't. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Hannah and I talked a little bit about this before. I mean, one thing is, you know, I love that you invited us to be part of this panel because we are, you know, a mid-sized university. I think it's really important for other libraries our size or smaller or just a little bit bigger to see that an agreement like this can be made successfully. And yeah, we're happy to talk about this anytime.
Great. So should we dive into some of the questions? I can see there are quite a few, which is fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. Right. So how many MSU authors published in CUP journals? So we've mentioned that earlier. So it was an average of, I think, 8 or 9 articles a year. Yeah. Yep. And by the way, when we talk about the number of articles, we're only looking at the research articles. So we don't count any of the other types of articles that we publish in our journals. We just look at the research, and the research articles are those which are eligible to be published OA under the agreement as well, which is important. What sources do you use to gather MSU author data analytics? So we use our own systems. Basically, we have our our own production systems and our own content management systems, let's call them that. So we have reporting that, that pulls out all sorts of metadata from the journals, articles that we have, and we analyze it and put together reporting for institutions. And we tend to verify our own reporting, and there's a bit of kind of cross-checking that goes on against a few external sources. So things like Web of Science, we tend to sort of just cross-check a little bit to make sure that the data is as accurate as it can possibly be. But the majority of it comes entirely from our own systems. So that's information that people submit through the submission process, so via the peer review systems, etc. How do you manage grant funding for those authors who have external grant funds that support OA publishing? Great question, Joan, thank you. So I think one thing we say about these types of agreements is that they are probably best suited to cover authors who do not have grant funding. So in the event that an author was in possession of grant funds, they would actually be able to declare that through the process that they go through. So they would be able to say, I will not be requesting that this article is published open under this agreement, and that I have grant funding that I will use myself. And there is a point at that point they can input information about who that grant funder is and where that invoice for the APC should be sent to, or who it should be sent to. So it's really important that that facility exists, because I think we want to capture that grant funding if we possibly can, because it helps the library and institution fund go further, I think, which is really important. So we do have that mechanism. We're also performing lots of work around all of our kind of author workflows, which is designed to kind of streamline that process a little bit better. And we're going to move to a system whereby one of the first things people do when they submit an article to us is to say if there is grant funding and who that's from, and we can then direct them down a very specific publication route in accordance with that grant funding. Because of course there's requirements that come with some grant funding, so we need to be able to comply with those as well, in terms of, say, the CC BY license that might be required, or any other grant-funded specified requirements. Hope that answers the question. I'm trying to scroll through to see if there's any that are directly for you guys, Hannah and Michelle. Here we go. So question for MSU: without liaisons to make connections with teaching departments, how do you know you are accurately assessing faculty need? Was authorship from MSU in Cambridge titles part of the mix here?
So our liaison program was disbanded 3 years ago, Hannah, I believe. So there was a liaison program, and it was still there the first year that I was in the library. So although we don't have a formal liaison program, we do have librarians that work closely with departments. Obviously, it's not like they just ended their relationships when the program ended. And Hannah and I just reach out to people. We just don't hesitate to contact a department head or somebody. I will, because I'm still probably a little on the newer side, I'll work with some of the librarians who have been here a while and know folks, just to, do you have a lead for me to reach out? But I don't hesitate to contact people, and I usually get a good response.
Are there any other questions that you can see that stand out to either of you that you want to take? I don't want to dominate the Q&A.
There was a question about the 50,000 in the collections budget that
Right.
started the author fund. Because I wasn't here when that started, I don't know definitively. However, the person who was in my position, Dora Lynn, who's still in the library, she and Layla work closely together. And my educated guess is that there was just a lot of enthusiasm for OA. And so she just made that decision. I'm guessing with other library staff. Hannah, you were here. I don't know if you know exactly, and I'm happy to reach out to them and ask to get the right answer. But my guess is that Dora Lynn and Layla made that decision about the budget, so it was just earmarked for that. And I don't think there was any extra money given because we haven't had a raise to our collections budget in 5 years. So since that 2015 fiscal year budget.
Yeah, I don't know, Rochelle. I wasn't in the department at that time either. But I think your guess is right. They made space for it, but there wasn't extra money given to the budget. They just probably kind of picked, some things to stop subscribing to make space for it, but I don't know.
Yeah, up until 2 fiscal years ago, there has been a little bit of extra money left over at the end of the fiscal year because we've been able to make sort of those one-time purchases at the end. We haven't been able to do that the last couple of years and probably won't this year. But so I'm sure at the time there was the thought like this can be done.
There's one here from Tammy. John mentioned he wanted to dismantle the assumption that open access is too expensive. What is the range of the costs? So I think the cost will be what you are spending with us right now on your journal subscription. I think that's the kind of basis for the agreements that we have. So we would look at exactly how much you're spending with us right now and how much you're publishing and how best we can utilize those dollars. To enable you to offer, ideally, uncapped or unlimited open access publishing to your faculty. So the range of the costs really depend on what you're spending with us right now. And I think, as I said, there will always be some type of provision available. And really, it's our aim to kind of make moving into a different type of agreement as cost neutral as it can possibly be. That's really important to us. Unless the value of the publishing far outstrips the value of your subscriptions with us right now, there won't be, or there shouldn't be, a need to pay an additional fee. And I know lots of publishers are kind of proposing quite large stepped increases to institutions in order for them to transition into these types of agreements. We're not doing that. We don't believe that's sustainable. The system is under enough pressure as it is right now. So we're working really hard to provide the best provision we can at the spend that you currently have with us. I think we've probably got time for one more question if Hannah or Rochelle wants to pick one out from the list.
I guess I can answer the last one. Did MSU authors use all of the free APCs with Cambridge? No, before Cambridge switched our model to uncapped, we were at 4 out of 7. So we had 3 remaining for this for the rest of 2020, and then they moved to that model. So yeah.
Well, I suppose it is. You could have used those 3 extras, given the rate of publishing that was happening. I think you might well have possibly hit it within year 1. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, very, very much for joining and asking such fantastic questions. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Rochelle, for joining. I really appreciate it. And hope everybody has a brilliant week. Thanks very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.